Thanks, Ahmed. Thank you, Murtaza. We have had a nice long day, a lot of insights. I'll just take 5 minutes and then we can close out and have a quick networking and wine session or a fresh drink session this evening. I wanted to just, first observation is we heard a lot about customer centricity today. And it reminded me back in the mid-'80s when I was in New York, there was Citibank CEO John Reed. And John Reed's office was on the first floor of a nondescript tower next to Citicorp Center. And the reason he's operated out of the first floor, it was easy for his customers to come visit him, even though he was the CEO of Citibank. And it was easy for him to go out and see customers. One example of customer centricity at a very high level a long time ago in a brick and mortar context here. Another example, a few years ago, American Express ran a corporate bank that they ultimately shut down. And I remember the CEO in Hong Kong telling me that when they moved the branch from the ground floor to the first floor, they lost 30% of their LC volume because the office boys who had to come with the LCs, you know, if you had limits for 4 banks, this was going to take more effort, yeah. So I just reflecting and saying, listen, customer centricity has always been around. It now has a more digital context in the way we talk about it, right? The other, observation I wanted to make today was very interesting. We talked a lot about digital banking, but we didn't spend any time talking about credit. And I'll just take a couple of minutes on credit, right? I mean, at the end of the day, banks are in the business of, also primarily lending money. And I think the biggest challenges that I've seen over the years in working with banking clients and restructuring is the new credit approval process and the credit renewal process. And, every time we do this, we look at the exceptions and the exception reporting. There are a large number of exceptions. The categorization of exceptions is not clear. And especially in the SME context where money is always short for them, the faster you can turn around something on the credit side, the more revolve on the money you get, and therefore the more money they make and the more money you make, right? And very often banks sometimes don't see those opportunities, and it's interesting through the day we didn't really hear about what we can do with fintechs and credit. But a few years ago I was hosting John Sculley, who was the former CEO of Apple. And after he left Apple, and he obviously had a lot of money, and his brother was an ex-MD at JP Morgan, they ran a family office and they built out a finance company that operated in Hong Kong, in Singapore, and so on and so forth. And the one opportunity he saw to lend to SMEs was we talked about supply chain today, was the supply chain of large companies in the telecom, medical equipment, and computing space. And what John and his team found was that there are principles, for example, there are companies and trading companies that operate, for example, in the Middle East or in Singapore, that may be representing an HP, an IBM, an AT&T, tier 1 suppliers globally. But the way the banks assess the credit risk is very similar to the credit risk assessment they would do for a traditional SME. And there was almost 20 to 30% of underfunding, shall we say, of what was happening to these SMEs that Scully and his team thought was an opportunity from a risk management perspective, right? So actually they just literally in Singapore and in Hong Kong, they would say, okay, who's representing these 50 global principals? They'd go find those trading companies, and they had figured out that the bank would probably short them 30% on working capital and lines of credit and simply top up, and then they ultimately, aggregated the debt and kind of resold it, right? So I think, again, we've talked a lot today about how things can be done differently and being innovative, and these are some very basic examples that I think banks and people in the lending space can look at. And especially when we all know that, SMEs are 60% of either the labor force in a country or the number of companies in a country, right? So I think with these closing points, I think just thank you all for coming today. I thank the panelists. I don't know, Sean lives in Dubai or Abu Dhabi, but thank you for being here, and thank you for some of you who stayed through the day. We hope to see you again soon. I'm sure some of our faces are recognizable from the team, and they'll be out meeting all of you, but I hope to meet all of you again one of these days. But have a good evening, and thanks again. Yeah, thank you.